Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Dwyer. Wang Shanghao, Wan Ying, Laida Shinidashu. Welcome to this taster masterclass for the Master of Media Practice degree offered by the Department of Media and Communications. Sam, do you want to click the next slide? Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land and the virtual spaces we're meeting on today, the Gadigal people. I'm the degree director of the Master of Media Practice program and the postgraduate coursework coordinator for the Department of Media and Communications. The Department of Media and Communications here at Sydney is ranked 22nd in the world in communication and media studies by QS University Rankings by Subject in 2021. And USyd graduates are ranked first in Australia and fourth in the world for employability in the 2022 QS Graduate Employability Rankings. The purpose of this presentation today is to provide a brief overview of the program and a taste of the units and their content. I want to begin with a rationale of the degree structure, provide some context for the rapidly evolving media and communications industries, and then go into some details of the program, including sharing some brief samples of the core unit content. The Master of Media Practice focuses on content production in the dynamic and increasingly global field of media and communications. Areas of study include broadcast and online journalism, media liaison, writing for the media, social media communication, feature and news writing, ethical and legal issues in media practice, and international media practice. The course will broaden your written and spoken communication skills as well as your production skills in print, broadcast, and online media. And you'll also develop a sophisticated understanding, hopefully, of media industries, audiences, and global media environments. This master degree program equips students with contemporary media making competencies that are used widely in various media industry sectors: TV, video, and audio, podcasting. Journalism skills are central to the curriculum and available in specific production-based units. In the degree, students take 4 core units focusing on ethical decision-making and legal frameworks for analysing the media. You study more deeply theorised knowledges about the global media industries and study news writing and social media communication. These units have in common that they teach critical thinking in curricular areas that complements the practical industry or media making skills. You can choose career path specializations from a range of media related electives to build your own skills and interests, such as financial journalism, health, gender and cultural studies, politics, film, magazines, publications, games, and the media industries in Asia, to name just a few. Graduates of this program have gone to work in the media in various media production and journalistic capacities in Australia and internationally. Your lecturers are also very accomplished researchers in social media, media policy and regulation, journalism, and global media industries, for example. And their research informs their teaching, and they're active participants in international research organisations such as the International Communications Association or the International Association of Media and Communications Researchers, IAMCR. Now, let me show you a short clip which talks about themes of next year's IAMCR annual conference, which is being held in Beijing. And the conference is titled Reorienting Media and Communication Research in the Era of Neo-Globalization. Sam, if you could run that, that would be great.
A year and a half into the global pandemic of COVID-19, the world is facing unprecedented challenges of the brand new media and cultural topography in the post-pandemic era of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, including but not limited to issues related to public health, climate change, and sustainability. With more than 3 decades of cultural, economic, and communication globalization, we now enter an all-encompassing post-pandemic world of neo-globalization. This contemporary world with the central tenets of globalization and mediatization poses urgent questions and challenges for media and communication scholars. What are the roles of media and communication in the construction of a global public health community? How do data and digital science shape and influence intercultural communication? What are the essential global media ethics in the digital age? IAMCR 2022 Beijing seeks to reorient media and communication research in the era of neo-globalization and respond to these questions by exploring feasible future agendas. Organized by 2 leading Chinese universities in Beijing and Suzhou, IAMCR 2022 is set to bring together different perspectives from the global and local communication and media spaces in the hope for reorienting and enriching the field for the post-pandemic world of neo-globalization.
We look forward to your participation in the conference. Welcome.
That's right. Thanks. Okay, so the skill set offered in the Master of Media Practice degree references the rapidly changing world of digital media consumption we live and work in. The future of the global media industries is being shaped by the COVID-19 crisis-induced acceleration to changes in consumer behaviour that have pulled forward digital disruption. Let's briefly consider these impacts before turning to some details of the degree and sample the content of a couple of the units of study. A recent report by consultancy group PricewaterhouseCoopers suggests that 5 major shifts that are impacting the media communications sector. Sam, if we could have the next slide. Next one. That's it. Thank you. Over the top of it all, they describe a macro shift as consumers stayed home during the pandemic and in-person venues closed. Use of digital services soared, and they describe several other shifts. With a burgeoning range of available platforms across traditional and social media and streaming, consumer access during the pandemic has been structured by finite resources, their time and money. Platforms such as TikTok, Douyin in China, Twitch and YouTube continue to close the gap between content creators and their audiences. Professionally generated content needs to conform with specific standards and regulations, while user-generated content is generally a bit more Wild West. But these sources of content are very dynamic, often algorithmically mediatized, so there's machine learning involved and personalization. And audiences are voting with their eyeballs, so to speak, in very interesting ways, including for news and information, with both good and bad consequences. As the report rightly notes, the key media consumption locations, the lounge room, the bedroom, and in transit, commuting, they're all shifting dramatically as the era of specific devices having control over a specific location are over. SVOD, or subscription video on demand, broadcast video on demand, BVOD, all these acronyms, PVOD, premium video on demand, event-based on demand content, and gaming platforms such as Amazon's Twitch are creating opportunities and equally regulatory issues. The shifting balance of power between traditional media and new media platforms has led national governments and their regulatory agencies to model new interventions like the Australian government's News Media Bargaining Code laws, which arguably seeks to bolster public interest journalism. Okay, so just going to the program itself, some of the key structural features of the program are that it's generally 1.5 or 1.5 years in duration, depending on recognised prior learning. It runs over 3 semesters and requires the completion of 72 credit points. Domestic students are able to study part-time, not so internationals. Students take a minimum of 24 credit points of core units, a maximum of 42 credit points of elective units, at least 6 credit points of capstones. With the permission of the degree director, a maximum of 12 credit points can be taken as elective units, including units from outside the program table, and including 6 credit points from other faculties. Sam, thanks. The Master of Media Practice degree requires 6 credit points of capstone. And these allow a thesis or report style project around a specific industry segment focus. And in our experience, these capstones really enhance expertise and therefore graduate employability. Graduates who have completed a dissertation with a meritorious grade are eligible to pursue a higher degree by research in their chosen subject area. All capstones except the dissertation unit, or there's 2 units actually, Part A and Part B, have prerequisites of 48 credit points. Some capstones have additional co or prerequisites. So for example, with the dissertation, the additional co or prerequisite is a methods unit. And for the advanced media project, whether that's involving video, TV or audio podcasting, they require 48 credit points, but also relevant production units. The professional project capstone has no additional prerequisites other than the 48 credit points. While the internship, a placement in industry, requires a diagnostic skills test. Next slide, thanks, Sam. Okay, so there are alternative pathways other than an 18-month degree for students to fit into their working lives. There's a scaled back graduate diploma in media practice with the completion of 48 credit points. The graduate diploma in media practice is awarded with the completion of 48 credit points, as opposed to 72 for the full degree. It requires a minimum of 24 credit points of core units of study and a maximum of 24 credit points from elective units of study. With the permission of the degree director, a maximum of 6 credit points can be taken as elective units from outside the program table. Now, the graduate certificate in media practice is another pathway, and it's 24 credit points, and it requires a minimum of 12 credit points of core units of study and a maximum of 12 credit points from elective units of study. So this can be something, a shorter program of study for some people that might suit their working lives more. So just going now to the core units of the program, you can see that there is news writing, social media communication, legal and ethical issues in media practice, and international media practice. Now, let me tell you a little about each of those. So news writing introduces students to key news writing skills, including the elements of journalistic style, the structure of news articles, interviewing, researching, news gathering, and editing skills. While the unit is focused on journalistic writing, it's also very useful for other fields that require professional communication skills, including public relations and communication management. Social media communication introduces students to the fundamentals of strategic social media use for professional and organisational communication, media practice, and cultural production. A major focus is on ethical social media usage and the ability to critically analyse social media forms. Legal and ethical issues in the media, the unit that I'm responsible for, introduces students to ethical theories and decision-making models, and legal and regulatory frameworks for media practitioners. It includes an overview of key areas of media law, such as defamation, privacy, copyright, and media codes of practice. And I'll have more to say about those sort of codes of practice shortly. The other core unit is international media practice. And this unit introduces students to a wide range of national media contexts. So you can draw on your own experiences from national media contexts in both the global south and global north. It draws on comparative media theories to map, analyse, and debate similarities between media markets, management, regulatory arrangements, professional media practices, and user cultures. So let's drill down on some sample content now. In international media practice, you can see that you'll map the changing contours of international media power and practice, investigate global media through comparative research, develop expertise in creating media narratives and counter-narratives to engage transnational audiences in discussion of complex global issues. The question of media representation is a key issue of concern for this unit. The Tokyo Olympics was an opportunity to very positively advance the international refugee debate. And the media, of course, are globally implicated. And you can see that there's the team of Refugee Olympics here in this slide at the Tokyo Olympics, which was used to raise awareness of the global refugee crisis. So this slide is showing an example of social media cosmopolitanism. In the 1990s, the Taliban banned the internet. Now they use it to build their own power. It also invokes related areas of analysis in relation to soft power, a concept from Joseph Nye, and information warfare. And aspects of social media skills and analysis are explored in various units throughout the degree. The recent Facebook papers have exposed many problems in relation to unregulated content on social media. Principal among these, of course, are hate speech and fake news. And in the quote here, it's saying that India is Facebook's largest market with over 350 million users. Nearly 400 million Indians also use the company's messaging service, WhatsApp. Investigative journalism can be a very dangerous media practice, but it's critical for democracies and for media pluralism. Journalists Maria Reza of the Philippines, Dmitry Muratov of Russia have won this year's Nobel Prize for their efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. 2021 is the first time in 85 years that the Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to journalism and to journalists. Now, this slide is an example that would be very useful in assessments for legal and ethical issues in media practice. A former Prime Minister, especially one K. Rudd, can make a media regulator suddenly pay attention. Who would have thought a tweet by former Prime Minister Rudd can invoke multiple regulatory issues and concerns relevant to this core unit? First, it was referencing COVID-19 misinformation about anti-vax and ill-informed medicines commentary on the News Corp-owned subscription broadcaster Sky News by their so-called after dark celebrity commentators. The content was captured by the subscription broadcasting codes of practice supervised by the industry regulator, the Australian Communications and Media Authority. Second, since Sky News is transmitted over free-to-air broadcasting throughout Eastern Australia, it was caught by Free TV's, that's the industry body, code of practice, also supervised by the Communication and Media Authority. Third, it referred to the Rudd-initiated petition to the Australian Parliament concerning News Corp and the call for a Royal Commission, which attracted 500,000 signatures and is still before a Senate committee into media diversity. Fourth, this issue of inaccurate news content or misinformation involved Google's YouTube, who were also retransmitting the content on their platform. And they made a decision to deplatform Sky under their own community guidelines. And this attracted wide media coverage. The principal line of questioning being, how can a US-based platform take action against misinformation when the local media regulator appeared to be sitting on its hands? It was actually more complicated than it might have first appeared, but nonetheless, it caused some incredulity in the media and amongst the senators. Now, fifth, it also related to a new digital platform's voluntary code of practice for harmful disinformation and misinformation called the Digi Code. Now, Digi stands for the Digital Industry Group Code, and the signatories include Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, and Twitter, amongst others. The code was recommended by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, a competition regulator, in their highly influential digital platforms inquiry, which also led to the much better known mandatory news bargaining code and law for the platforms to pay traditional news media businesses for their content. But that code is another saga that we won't go into now. Let's take a look at some headlines to show how the media covered this issue. Okay, so you can see the various headlines here. YouTube restricts Sky Channel news over COVID misinformation, demands for Sky YouTube media regulator to face Senate inquiry, which they did. Communications watchdog's role in question as Sky News Australia cops YouTube suspension. And this opinion piece here with the headline, where was the broadcasting regulator when Sky News Australia was airing misinformation about COVID-19? Now, former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd wrote to the chair of the ACMA about the matter and the particular claims made on Sky TV. So those claims included things like COVID-19 is not a pandemic, the vaccinated are more likely to die than the unvaccinated, hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin are proven safe treatments for COVID-19. The medical profession are concealing these treatments from the public for political purposes. Face masks do not inhibit the spread of COVID-19 and so on. So there were all these claims that were being broadcast quite irresponsibly on the Sky network. And you can see here in the highlighted part of on page 2 that Kevin Rudd even enlisted the expertise of certain media academics, which is interesting. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Sam. Now, as I mentioned, this content was a breach of YouTube's community guidelines, and it was used to deplatform Sky News. You can see that there's a process for violating content. There's a warning and then a 3 strikes approach. I understand that there were 23 videos that were pulled from YouTube early on in the strike process. Next slide, thanks, Sam. Might require a double click. So in the unit, you'll learn about the forms of media regulation, with the different forms having implications for monitoring compliance of the media. Codes of practice are one of the most prevalent forms of regulation used in media industries. These 2 excerpts here are from co-regulatory codes administered or supervised by the regulator, the Communications and Media Authority. The first is from the Commercial Free TV Code of Practice. And in the News and Current Affairs Program section 3.3.1, you can see that it says that in broadcasting a news or current affairs program, a licensee, the legal entity responsible for the service, must present factual material accurately and ensure viewpoints included in the program are not misrepresented. And in the second, this is an excerpt from the Subscription TV Code of Practice, and also concerning news and current affairs programs. You can see that it says that news and current affairs programs broadcast by licensees must present news accurately, fairly, and impartially. Now, so that's similar to the free-to-air code above. You can also see that there is an added clause there, 2B6, which says licensees will make reasonable efforts to correct significant errors of fact at the earliest opportunity. Now, this kind of clause is holding licensees accountable to make corrections. This excerpt is from the new voluntary Digi Code of Practice that I mentioned earlier, and it'll give you some sense of the key concepts under the code. The guiding principles, and there are 7 in fact, but the first deals with protection of freedom of expression. Digital platforms, it says, provide a vital avenue for the open exchange of opinion, speech, information, research and debate and conversation, as well as creative and other expression across the Australian community. So that's kind of one of the key guiding principles. But also of interest is the glossary part of the code, which defines misinformation here. And it says that misinformation means digital content, often legal, yet that is verifiably false or misleading or deceptive, is propagated by users by digital platforms, and the dissemination of which is reasonably likely, but may not be clearly intended to, in the emphasis there, cause harm. So that emphasis there highlighted is in the actual code. And we can note that this extra element of intentionality in the misinformation definition is the same as in the disinformation code, except for that highlighted qualification there, but may not be intended to clearly cause harm, which is not in the disinformation code. Okay, next slide, thanks. All right, so the media regulator, the ACMA, have a complaints and investigations process, which with several pathways depending on the specific issue. In this slide, more serious issues in the first column involving a complaint about a license condition, for example, not disclosing the source of advertising spend in a program, which they're required to do as a license condition, comes under an offence or penalty provision, and they go straight to the regulator. In the second column, complaints about a code of practice, and this is a far more common occurrence, are lodged with first with the broadcaster under the code of practice. That's the nature of the co-regulatory system, where the industry works with the regulator. But if there's no response within 60 days or a response is inadequate, they're lodged with the ACMA. And then also, you can see there that the ACMA may investigate if it is desirable to do so under Section 149. And that the legal expression in that case is that it's acting under its own volition. Now, in the third column, the ACMA may initiate investigation under Section 170, again, very much under its own volition, that is whether or not there's a formal complaint. Okay, in the final slide, it's showing a number of steps required. We might need one more click, thanks. Thank you, that's it. Are required for enforcement of a civil penalty. In other words, a large monetary fine to be imposed on the owner of a TV broadcasting license. We can see that for a less serious breach of the code, which happen quite frequently, of course, there are more steps than a breach of the license condition, the one at the top. There are more steps in the second and third regulatory enforcement flows. So that's just a little indicator of different levels of enforcement, if you like. Anyway, so hopefully through these examples, you can see that media laws and questions of regulation can be multi-layered and technical, but they're important for students in the Master of Media Practice to be aware of as responsible media practitioners, and for the development of individual ethics, as well of course, for questions of legal liability. Now, thanks for watching, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the content or about the degree.
Thanks very much, Tim. While we're waiting for some questions to come through, so just a reminder to our attendees this evening that you are welcome to put through any questions you have for Tim in the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to answer them. Tim, I thought I might kick us off with a question that I had, just out of my own curiosity from listening to your presentation. Do these kinds of standards, do other countries have similar standards, and is there any such thing as an international code of conduct or similar?
Look, there are international conventions, and that last code that I mentioned, the DigiCode of Practice, which is quite a new code for misinformation and harmful content, which has just been developed in the last year. That's actually based on a European Union instrument, a code also, which has been in place for a bit over a year. So there are similar ones, but I think your question is asking me whether there's one that governs everyone, all nations. Not really. And that's the thing that, I mean, we think of the internet as being global, and it is in terms of infrastructure and its reach. But in terms of regulation, these platforms are very much regulated at the nation state or regional level.
Yeah, it presents some really interesting dilemmas, I guess, when you have a big platform like the YouTube example you gave. They're an American-owned company, but their reach is far beyond that country. So, I mean, do individual nation states have
they do.
Ability to
They do. So Australia has been actually a leader in this area, and quite recently, I mean, as well as the DigiCode, we've also introduced laws into our parliament to attempt to address what has been called the power imbalance between the platforms and news media businesses. So we now have this, what's known as a new news media bargaining code in place. And the purpose of that was to attempt to send revenue from the platforms to news media broadcasters to essentially force the platforms to pay for content that they're getting from the news media businesses. And that was very much a law and a process that put Australia in the spotlight, because it really hadn't happened before in quite the same way using competition law. There'd been other attempts in Europe based around copyright law, but no one had really used competition law in quite this way. So that's actually led to other countries, for example, Canada, attempting to put similar laws in place. So it's very much a situation where, information is shared and the ability to legislate and some of that knowledge is shared around the world, but it's happening at a nation state level.
Very interesting. Thank you, Tim. We have had a couple of questions come through. So Jessie would like to know if you could tell us a bit about the difference between this degree, the Master of Media Practice, and another master's which your department offers, the Master of Digital Communication and Culture. She's noticed that they do share some similar units of study, and she was wondering if you could help to differentiate what they're each about.
Sure. Okay, well, yeah, Jessie is, that's right, that there are some similarities. And the good thing about these degrees is that they do share content, and you can sort of mix and match the units to quite an extent. I would say, however, that someone who is undertaking the media practice degree is probably wanting to be involved in production, media production to some extent. And that might be in traditional media, or it might be in social media. It might be in a news streaming platform. It could also be, in new media forms or even an area like gaming. Now, there is content in those areas that is shared in the Master of Digital Communication and Culture program. And there's probably, a difference in theorized content as well. So some of the units of study that are available in that degree, for example, internet governance is quite a specific unit of study, but it kind of overlaps with the media practice degree to some extent. So you would need to look closely at, your choice of units and where you wanted to take your career, and then sort of construct the degree or use the, whichever degree is the best fit.
Do you perhaps have some suggestions of differences in potential career outcomes between the two? So we understand that media practice is a lot more production based, there's more practical skills, and you learn sort of more hands-on skills in utilizing various software. But digital communication and culture is a bit different. Perhaps you could embellish a little bit more on where that one could take you.
Look, it could also take you into production areas. And it's, as I said, it really sort of depends on what your own career planning is. Perhaps, you might be interested more in technical or technological, socio-technical, technological aspects of communication and cultural industries, in which case you might be more inclined to do the Master of Digital Communication and Culture program. But you would need to look at the actual core units of study to help you make those decisions.
Thanks, Tim. Sam, I'll ask my colleague Sam here just to pop some links into the chat box for you, Jessie, where you can see the list of the units of study in each of those degrees, as Tim has been describing. We had an earlier question from Annabelle, who would like to know roughly the size of the cohort year to year in broad terms. If you could let us know perhaps how the degree is taught, how it's structured between the lectures and seminars.
Okay. Well, it's a very popular degree. So, there are almost, 180, perhaps 200 students start each year. And you can commence the degree in the first or second half of the year. It's based around a seminar structure. So students do weekly seminars. Now, those seminars could be broken down into, as in the unit I teach, legal and ethical issues in media practice, broken down into a lecture component and then a seminar component where students can, do group activities. There's kind of an assessment in my unit, which is a blogging activity. There are presentations. So I think that at a postgraduate level, it is a sort of a liberal arts approach to the pedagogy, to teaching. But it has production units which are very hands-on. So, for example, you might be doing podcasting, which is smaller groups, and it's quite intensely involved in your own, making of podcasts. And I mean, you might collaborate with people to make those and group processes. So there's this mix of, theorized content and hands-on making of content.
And how big would those seminar groups be, roughly?
Typically, they're about 20 to 25, that sort of size.
Great. So even though it's quite a popular course, we do break you down into smaller groups, so you'll have a chance to get more hands-on and
that's right,
have some time with your tutors.
And the production units would be smaller groups again, perhaps 20-ish. That varies a bit.
Thanks, Tim. We've had a question come through. This person would like to know if the degree offers any units in digital media.
Yes. Well, I think that just about everything is digital media now. So, I mean, the word digital is kind of bandied around quite a bit. And we have to sort of bear in mind that there are processes of what we refer to as digitalization. So, things that were happening in traditional media have been, thoroughly digitized now. So, for example, news, we've gone from more traditional production processes through to a digitized online production process, which shares elements of the traditional approach, but is quite uniquely digital in terms of being on the internet and having interactivity. But all the content that you would be doing is in effect digital, because at some level or other you're using computers, you're using the internet. So you can almost sort of do away with the term digital in a sense, because it's just media. It's just that the processes these days are digitalized.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. There are no more questions in the queue at the moment. So to our attendees, please do feel free. We are available for the next few minutes to answer any other questions that you might have. Tim, while we have you, I wanted to ask a question that Sam and I often receive when we're speaking with students. So in addition to the Master of Digital Communication and Culture, they often ask about the distinction with the Master of Strategic Public Relations as well, which is also related but separate from media practice. Perhaps you could share a bit about how those two degrees are distinct.
Yeah. Well, as the name suggests, a Master of Strategic Public Relations is very much about the subdiscipline, if you like, of media and communications, which is known as strategic communication. You know, sometimes it's called media relations or public relations. You know, a lot of journalists these days actually go into public relations and media relations, and they're doing similar work. You know, they're writing for a corporation or some business, and the communications that they're involved in preparing are very tailored to specific purposes. You know, they're related to corporate purposes, to public facing purposes. So it is sort of a subdiscipline based around, you know, public relations, strategic public relations. And students would be involved in preparing campaigns and other forms of communication on behalf of, you know, a corporation or an NGO or some other communications organization.
Thanks, Jim. So I guess a follow-up on that. So you've described some of the types of students who might be suitable for that degree. Is there much of a recommendation the department gives about whether or not you need to have professional experience before entering into any of the three degrees that I've just mentioned? Can you go into it straight away from a bachelor's?
You can. Yeah, so there are no prerequisite requirements in terms of work experience, but often we find, you know, students will have worked possibly in some area of the media, and they wish to, you know, kind of boost their careers, and so they'll do the Master of Media Practice, or they'll do the Digital Communications and Culture degree, and that's what they're there for. They're there to boost people's careers and to take them in directions that you would like to go in. So that's kind of the beauty of these programs, that they are very career enhancing. But no, you don't have to have had experiences in the media, you know, and you can use them. You can use these programs to change direction. I mean, you might have been working as an editor somewhere in the media, and all of a sudden you want to work in strategic public relations, for example, or some other you know, quite specific sector of the communications industries. So no, you don't have to have done anything in particular in your first degree before you would do a postgraduate master degree.
Good to know. Thanks, Tim. And you've touched on my next question here now, which is, what kind of jobs do people go on to after they graduate? Obviously, it's a huge industry. There's many different things that you could go on and do. Do you have any examples, perhaps, of interesting areas that your alumni have got into?
Yeah, well, it's varied. It is an enormous range of different roles within media and communications. Our students go on to work in media organisations, obviously. I was speaking to a graduate recently who'd reached quite a senior level in Shenzhen at a newspaper, a daily newspaper, and she was very involved in uploading content to social media from the Shenzhen Daily metropolitan newspaper. So, you know, responsible for WeChat channels and so on. You know, so you can have this sort of very hands-on media production role, editorial roles, and then obviously traditional roles in media journalism. So our students have always been very strong in this area of journalism and writing roles. So anything that involves writing in media and communications, graduates of our courses go on to work in any of those sort of areas. I mean, communications agencies, or any organizations which have internal communications sections, podcasting companies, radio, press, magazines, all kinds of online sites, so all kinds where there's content that's prepared. It's endless, it really is. So if you think of media content in any location, that is a place where you can be trained within the Master of Media Practice degree.
Absolutely. I'd say it's not uncommon to turn on the television or open up the newspaper and see a lot of the journalist names that are recognized from being past students. And certainly internationally, that would be the case as well. Yes. Graduates go far and wide.
Absolutely, they do. Yeah. And as you say, you sort of switch on some media and you see our students, which is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Tim. We're out of time for the session tonight. I just wanted to say thank you to our attendees for joining us, and thank you to Tim for presenting this taster class. We hope that you enjoyed it. If you do have any more follow-up questions that we haven't had a chance to answer, feel free to email us. Our email address is future.students@sydney.edu.au, and I'll ask my colleague Sam to pop that into the chat for you to copy out. We look forward to seeing you on campus hopefully next year. Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Thanks very much, Julian.
Thanks.
And Sam.